recognize that Summer Walker actually in the background. And the song that she's a part of talks about the whirlwind nature of long distance romance and truly how volatile it can be to get to know your partner when you're spending really short amounts of time together and then deciding to commit. What actually are the implications of making such a life changing decision on both your long term financial and emotional security? I think that's probably something to contemplate because keep in mind, there are a lot of financial commitments you need to make to this person, especially from an immigration standpoint. And you need to really read the fine print to make sure you know what you're getting into. I hate bringing up this reality TV show, but at the same time, what can be learned from shows like 90 Day Fiancé or on the implications of what long distance romance might look like? Please forgive me because I know the comparison is extreme. But anyway, in today's episode, we're going to actually dive into what you need to know when sponsoring a spouse from abroad. And that's really an important issue for hiring women who sometimes find love in the strangest of places, not necessarily in their home country. You know, I believe marriage is a beautiful thing. Not that I'm married personally, but love is a beautiful thing as well. But when you add the legal and financial complexities of immigration and sponsorship into the mix, things can get really, really tricky, especially if this relationship takes an unexpected turn. And we know these things can turn, right? Anyway, that's why I'm thrilled to have Andy Semotiuk. Did I get your name right, Andy? I'm so sorry.
Semotiuk, yeah.
Semotiuk. Okay, Andy Semotiuk. I got that. And he's an experienced U.S. and Canadian immigration lawyer at Pace Law Firm. And he's with us today. So, Andy, welcome to the show. I really hope you enjoyed the song. Not that you've ever heard it before, but Helen Back may not be necessarily what you want to have your clients think of when they're thinking of saying I do to someone abroad.
Well, I believe in relationships and hopefully good ones.
Right.
And I'm happy to talk about how to make sure that your relationship is as good as it can be, and to help people with immigration issues if they have any immigration issues. So I'm very happy to spend a little bit of time with you to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation because honestly, it's a topic that's very overlooked. So I'm glad we're bringing this out. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start with the basics? Can you help me understand what exactly it means to sponsor a spouse for Canadian immigration, and what are the financial obligations a sponsor takes on?
Okay, we're going to talk about Canadian immigration, but it's almost the same in America. So we can talk about Canadian or American.
Okay.
Now, usually the situation is there's a citizen, either Canadian or American,
right,
who has found someone through this search for meaning and finding someone who is attractive, who lives abroad. And the question boils down to, after discussions and, the formalities and so on, is there enough glue there in that relationship to make it worthwhile to sponsor this person, which means to help this person immigrate, let's say, to Canada, and to take on responsibility for this person's immigration, and indeed for what happens after they immigrate in terms of being in the new country. And believe it or not, the law places the exact same attention on this question that we need to put on it. And the law is all about, is the relationship for real? That's the big question. And why you need an immigration lawyer to help you is because you have to address that question properly. A lot of people don't know that there's a category of workers called immigration lawyers, and sometimes consultants are trained to do the same thing, but usually it's immigration lawyer. If I have a toothache, I know I have to go to a dentist, called a dentist. If I break my leg, I know I have to go to a doctor, to a hospital. But not everybody knows that if they have an immigration a question that the character or the type of person who helps people in that area is usually an immigration lawyer. In the United States, they're called attorneys; in Canada, lawyers. So once you make the decision that, yes, this person who lives abroad, it might be in Jamaica, it might be in Africa, it might be in Europe or China or wherever, once you as a Canadian citizen, or in Canada, even if you're just a permanent resident, and in the United States, similar rules apply, you can sponsor someone, meaning you make it easy, or you can open the door for the person to be able to immigrate to the new country. That's what sponsorship is all about.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that it's an immigration lawyer to talk to, because I wouldn't necessarily connect the dots there, that's who you should be talking to if you're sponsoring somebody abroad. But what the next thing I think of is, first of all, were you offended about the 90-day fiance comparison?
No, I don't mind at all.
Because I just think it's a huge responsibility to take on sponsorship. So let's talk about some worst case scenarios and what happens. Because when I've watched that show, I often ask myself the same thing. Is this relationship for real? Yeah. And, I feel really concerned for that person who, and I'm not a huge reality show fan. So confidant, high earning community, know that it's not me wanting to watch this. It's my partner. I have to throw him under the bus right now. But anyways, having said that, if the relationship falls apart, because I'm obviously very sympathetic to these women in particular who are bringing men from abroad to their home country, what are some of the legal and financial consequences that person could face?
Well, it's interesting. You're going right to that question. There's an earlier question, which is, can you prove that the relationship is real?
Okay.
And, now, maybe we can touch on that for a second, then jump.
Okay, because that's a question I have. I always ask that when I see these shows and think, could I do that? I mean, love is a crazy thing where, it's a leap of faith, right?
So in the process of sponsoring someone, there's an interview. The person coming into the country is going to be interviewed. And the interview is all about, is this a marriage of convenience for immigration reasons? In other words, is this person really saying they're marrying this person for love reasons, but actually marrying the person's passport so they can get into the country? So the big question is, how do you prove that this is a real relationship? And they have to go through an interview, and the interview people who run the interview are skilled at being able to detect whether the relationship's real or not. I think some of the factors that they use might be of interest to people who are listening to this.
Yes, please.
So, for example, I'll give you one example that didn't work in my career. I had a situation where there was a person sponsoring a woman, a Canadian woman, was sponsoring a husband from abroad, who was actually from the Philippines.
Right.
And the husband was 10 years younger than the spouse.
I can see that. That makes sense to me.
Okay. It makes sense to me too. But it didn't make sense to the official who was considering the application. And our argument was, if Pierre Trudeau could marry someone who was 10 years younger than him and make a go of it, why can't this relationship work as the opposite?
Precisely.
So it can work, but in that case it didn't. But one of the factors they look at is the age difference between the people. Other factors are educational differences. If you got a PhD on one side and a blue collar worker on another, that's an alarm.
Right.
Different religious backgrounds. One's a Baptist, the other's let's say a Muslim or whatever. That's an alarm.
Right.
Great disparity in wealth. One's very rich, the other's very poor. That's an alarm. Previous relationships and how that all factors in. If someone's been through like 5 relationships, is now on the 6th, there's an alarm there.
That makes sense.
How they met, under what circumstances, and how the relationship grew. So if they just met, had one cocktail together, and now they're getting married, and the person's being sponsored, that's a challenge. Doesn't sound like something that's evolving in the normal course of events. So those
Right.
are factors. And I just want to draw an analogy. During World War II, this is an interrogation method that they used in World War II when they found someone on the front and they didn't know what language the guy spoke. What they do is they put him up in a room with a bed, and in the middle of his sleep, they'd pull the legs out from under the bed, and the guy would fall on the floor and he'd swear in whatever you son of a, or whatever, in whatever language was his mother language. And that's the way they figured out, oh, this guy's German or this guy's French.
Oh, no way. That's hilarious.
Which they were hiding, And they also used interrogation methods, like they would ask a row of questions and then ask someone who he's related to the same questions to see who's lying. If everything matches, looks like it's a real, situation. But if there was conflict in the question, where were you born? In Italy. Where does the other guy say he was born? In Sweden. How old are you? 33. The other guy says 43.
Right.
If they're colliding like that in answers, and in the marriage situation, they'll interview the person who's coming in, but also the sponsor, and see how many collisions are there in answers to the same questions. And if there's a lot of collisions, then they say, oh, okay, that can't be a real relationship. This is all baloney.
And when you say collision, are they asking them like the same questions, like how did you meet, this kind of stuff, to see if they're?
They'll say, what? For example, they'll ask the man, say like, did you meet the family of the woman? And he said, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, what family does she have? And he may say, well, 2 brothers and 1 sister. And then they ask the woman, and she said, well, I don't have any brothers or sisters.
Oh,
okay.
Red flag. Okay.
Yeah. So things like that. So that's how they do it in the interview as part of the process of coming over.
Right.
So now assuming we get over that hurdle.
Right.
Cool.
When you say that, I just think they're almost helping you to do some due diligence around the relationship too, right?
Yeah. Now, let's say they got over that hurdle. Now, what responsibilities are you as a woman, let's say, taking on by sponsoring some guy? And what happens often, well, not that often, but it does happen, is a guy will come over and goodbye, Charlie. The next day he's gone. He's in the country. What does he need you for anymore?
Wow.
So the question now is, well, what can you do about that? And there are a couple of things. The first thing is, if there's a big discrepancy in wealth between the two of you, you're wealthy, he's not wealthy, for example, there's a prenup you can sign, an agreement that he's not entitled to any claims that he might be interested in making against you. But you have to understand, in a sponsorship, you assume responsibility for that person coming in. And if that person ends up on welfare, you will be liable for the expenses that person incurs in getting money from the government. There's a time period, 3 years or 10 years.
Is it 3 years or 10 years?
I think it's 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Where, and it depends on the country also, by the way, where you are liable for whatever debts that person incurs. Fortunately, it's very rare that a government will try to enforce indebtedness of this kind. But it has happened in my career where a client has come in and said, there was a default, and the guy was taking money from the government, and the government sued to recover the money, sued the sponsoring spouse for the debt of the person that incurred welfare. Although it is rare. So it's something you got to understand. It's something, like if you're in, I don't know what the saying is. If you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound.
A pound. I think if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. But are women or individuals in this scenario that are sponsoring really understand the analogy, like read the fine print. I mean, I think sometimes these relationships can be this whirlwind factor, right? Where you start off, like you meet somebody maybe at the resort and everything's fantastic and you're having these wonderful late night conversations, everything's fantastic. And you're like, I can't live without this person. And did you speak to an immigration lawyer about the potential fallout that can come from the relationship?
I would just, I'd point out one thing you can do. Let's say a guy comes, let's say you're a woman, you sponsor a guy shows up, 2 days later, he takes off.
Right.
What can you do?
Yeah.
One thing you can do is you can report the guy to the immigration authorities, saying, hey, listen, this guy came in, he was supposedly my husband, and he took off. I don't want any responsibility for this guy. This guy shouldn't be in Canada. And you can prepare a statement laying out all the factors in writing as to what's happened and how this guy took off and whatever, and if he took any money from you, what money he took, etc., and deliver it to the immigration authorities, asking them to trace this guy, get him, and put him back on a plane back to his country of origin. That's doable. Not many people know about that, but that is.
I didn't know about that because I was going to say, here's what I'm hearing, and you can just correct me if I've got any holes in this. Is this whole scenario where you could be responsible financially if the person that you're sponsoring leaves, and then they go on welfare, the government can come after you for the money that they've given them, but that doesn't happen that often, but it is a risk.
Right.
At the same time, if the person does come and then they leave, you have this opportunity to report them to immigration and hopefully get them back.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm wondering is if they come here, like the whole 90-day fiance thing. Sorry, I keep harping on it. But anyway, I just wanted to know, because they're legally here at this point when you marry them, or I don't know what the window of time is where they're considered legally here. Is that an option if they've been married here and then now they're here and they have their documents? Is that still something that can happen, or is that just happens between the time that they get married to you and the time that they get their papers, like their permanent residency?
Okay, so 90-Day Fiancé is an American show.
I know.
Canadian.
We have no Canadian equivalent. That's true.
The only way you get someone into the country is you marry them and sponsor them. Right. And you actually have to be physically present at the marriage. It's not like a post office marriage or some kind of online marriage. You actually have to be there to marry the person. So you're not going to have this 90-day window or anything like that. That's an American feature.
Good to know.
So really it boils down to you've sort of bit the bullet. You're in together, and the question is it going to last or not? And if it's not lasting, what can you resort to clean up a mess? And it boils down to if you're still on talking terms, you could work it out with the person, talking it out and reaching some sort of an agreement about how this is all going to end, including divorce, etc. Right. Separation, who's got what in terms of money, and if there's children, who's responsible for the children, who's responsible for paying support, alimony or whatever, maintenance. These are all things you'd have to reduce in writing to sort that aspect out. And from an immigration point of view, you have quite a powerful tool to enforce conduct. You can say, okay, look, we can live happily ever after, separated, but if we're not going to live happily ever after, I'm going to report you to the immigration authorities because you're not living up to your side of the deal here. And, you don't merit staying in the country under these conditions. So that's the way I guess you would kind of control the situation as someone who might have been hurt in a scenario where someone's come in.
So my quick question around that. So We get married abroad.
Right.
I find myself in this whirlwind, which is really hard for me. But let's just suspend belief for a second and say I find this whirlwind romance in another country, get married there, bring him here. Is there a period of time where after they get their, like, because I'm just trying to think about permanent residency, like they get married to me, what's the timeline before they can get permanent residency?
Or they get it on entry.
That's what I'm asking. So even with permanent residency on entry, I would still be able to call immigration and say, listen, okay, that's what I really wanted to understand.
Fraud, I've learned, here's what actually happened. And you guys let him in, but, there's reasons why he should not have been let in.
Okay, that's what I really want to know.
Fraud involved, they can bounce him out.
That's really what I want to understand, which I think the women listening to this really also want to understand as well. Now, before I go down this road of the whirlwind romance and I decide this person, I have stars in my eyes for them, what can I do to protect myself even before committing to that scenario?
Well, I would say such discussion, in my opinion, such discussion should happen person to person, like physically person to person. You sit down and say, look, if we're getting serious about this thing, we need to disclose to each other, what is our situation financially, economically. Also, I've written a few books about immigration, and in there's situations where someone shows up immigrating and finds out the spouse has a number of children.
Yeah.
What? Where did this come from? So you got to just explore what is the reality of the two of you. Have you been married before? What is your financial situation? What education? What's your background? Meet the people around the spouse, like family members, friends, to explore, to find out, is this person for real or is this a charlatan? And I think people get hurt because they allow themselves to live a dream instead of the reality. And so a really key factor is, I would say, for example, if you're going to go down if there's great discrepancy in wealth, then you want to reach a prenup agreement, which means you write down how much you have, you write down how much he has, for example, and then you reduce it to a written document that a lawyer would prepare that would be signed by both of you, basically saying, if we break up, I go my way, you go your way, I keep what I have, you keep what you have.
Right.
I don't claim anything against you, you don't claim anything against me.
Exactly.
That would be the way I would say. But, I'm a romantic. I'm reluctant to just say outright, oh, you need a prenup. If you've got so much money that you need a prenup, then okay, you need a prenup. But I think, I don't know. In many cases, if it's a real relationship, I don't think a prenup is necessarily needed. Honesty is needed. If people are honest with each other, that goes a long way.
Well, think of it this way too. Like, if that honest conversation means you're discussing, like, as a financial person, it's like, let's discuss these best case scenarios. We stay together, everything's great. But then let's discuss the worst case scenario. What would be like, and have an honest conversation about that. And then, depending on how that goes, you might decide, okay, you know what? Let's put that in writing. So, because I'll never forget a podcast I did a few years ago with a private investigator, and his message to our high earning community was trust, but verify.
Yeah.
Right. Which is that whole honesty piece. Right. So, okay, now we've like, verifying means I understand honestly where you're at and you understand honestly where I'm at. And we can honestly put down on paper, this is what the worst case scenario would look like if we both break up.
Yeah.
You can keep revisiting that document, and maybe we'll not only write it down, but we'll also take it to a lawyer so everybody feels confident, especially somebody I can imagine coming into a country, leaving their family, whoever behind, job, wants to have some level of, well, how do you establish trust? You put things in writing, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know. There's a moment of assessment of human being and their character.
Right.
These are things that even a lawyer is not going to help you with that. That's
True.
something you have to measure yourself and determine for yourself. And marriage is, even in the best scenarios, it's still a gamble. You never know.
Totally.
Don't know. You jump off together into the sea and see what happens.
Right.
That's part of life too, And but look, it's good to talk about what are the extremes if things go really bad. And for some people, they do go bad, and it's
Right.
hard. It's they need to know these things and nail them down, and get that all sorted out so that if things do go bad, they know what they can do. Now,
Yeah.
there's always, you can always sue the person. If you are sued, let's say you're a woman, you sponsored a man, he took off 2 days later and you haven't seen him since. And
Right.
he's been on welfare for 2 years, and you finally found him and he's incurred like $30,000 worth of debt, and the government is suing you for $30,000. You can join him as a defendant in the lawsuit. So the guy's not going to just walk off scot-free. You can get his assets, whatever they may be. Mind you, if the guy's on welfare,
It's not going to be much.
Yeah, but you never know. He may be hiding all kinds of assets. Crooks know how to handle these things,
Yeah, which kind of goes back to just really making sure, even like as the immigration officer is trying to make sure they know your relationship is for real. It sounds like you need to know your relationships for real more than anyone.
Yeah. And
it sounds like the fine print as well, really understanding what you're signing yourself up for.
It's really a really important consideration is if there are any children involved anywhere, because that can have a big impact on their lives. Right. So you'd have to be extra specially careful if there are children involved.
Wow. I think these are some really important precautions just to think true about, if you want to get a prenup, postnup, once you understand what all of the, as you would say, even like in good relationships, there might be, I won't say red, maybe pink flags, right? Do we have the same values? Do we earn the same amount of money? Do we have the same religion? All these things, as you're talking about them, I'm like, yeah, these are pink flags, like things that could come up the longer you're with someone, especially the longer you get to know them in your own country, could really become an issue.
Part of the way you can kind of protect yourself is, let's say this person that you're interested in lives in, I don't know, a country that's, say, third world country or whatever. When you travel there, maybe it's a good idea to meet with maybe a lawyer or a minister or priest or whatever, and talk with a third person involved in the discussion about how is this relationship going to work? Who is responsible for what? Do we realize, this is a big step, a big commitment, just to iron things out. And that third person can sometimes raise issues that you may not understand or may not be on top of, to help you kind of settle everything so you're clear-headed in terms of what you're doing.
That's so valuable, is definitely finding somebody in the home country of your partner and getting that, second opinion and what you should be thinking about. I really appreciate you saying that, because I don't think a lot of women realize that love and legal obligations don't always go hand in hand. And, as we're talking about sponsoring somebody that you love, all of the really all of the baggage that might go with that can be really big, can be really huge, those financial stakes. And I wondered, before I let you go, if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom for high earning women that might be considering sponsorship.
Well, I'd say trust but verify is a good
I love that one too.
piece of advice. Yeah. But I would say also, don't be jaundiced. Don't go into a relationship thinking, oh, I'm going to be harmed, I'm going to be hurt. And, this, no matter how good it looks, it's not good. You have to be level-headed in assessing situations. And I really believe in sincere discussions between individuals. A key thing is not to be in love with the idea of being married and happy. That's a problem. That's a problem. The key situation is to love yourself the way you are and think level-headed about what's happening in terms of the relationship. Some people just can't help but, dream of a great life being married. And they don't look at the reality. They just look at, they're in love with the idea. That's a problem. It's almost like an illness. You disabuse yourself of the romantic, not of romance, but of the romantic dream of being married and happy. That's something to beware.
I love that, because I think there's lots of people out there. I was for some reason thinking about Sex and the City and Charlotte and her hope chest. I don't know if you remember that show.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. But I just remember her really in love with the idea of love and marriage and what her ideals of what that would be. Yeah. And it can be quite different when you're in that scenario. So, ladies, if you're out there.
I've got a question for, let me conclude with a question. Okay?
Sure.
When you're talking to this guy, if you're a woman, I'm going to say you're a woman, you're talking to a guy, you want to marry this guy, okay? Just ask this question of yourself. If I'm sick and ugly and lying in a hospital in emergency, a few years from now, is this guy going to be around? Yes or no? And you'll know whether this is the right guy for you.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Please, I feel like you could do relationship counseling along with helping bring in a person into the country. So if people need to find you, where can they find you?
I'm at Pace Law Firm, which is a law firm in Toronto, Pace, Pace law firm. And just ask for Andy, and I'll be happy to help anybody.
Awesome. Well, I'm like, so Confidant community, a high earning community, you might know this or not, but I'm happily living in sin. So for those of you who are Christian out there who don't get that, please pray for me. Anyway, amazing. Ladies, if you're considering sponsoring a spouse or just want to be informed about your financial and legal rights, this episode is a must listen. Also, if this episode resonated with you, share it with another high earning woman in your network. Let's keep this conversation going. And please don't forget to subscribe, rate, leave a review if it helps more high earning women like yourself take charge of their finances with confidence. And please DM us if you have questions or you need support on your financial journey. Remember, money is power and you deserve to own yours. Okay? Until next time, high earning community. See you soon. Thanks again, Andy.